Today we are going to be talking about what is a decimal. A decimal is a part of a whole. And so we're going to start taking some notes on the teacher side. Think about if you had a whole pizza. When you order the pizza, they cut it into slices. They're actually cutting it into fractions, but fractions are the same thing as decimals. Decimals are just another way to represent a fraction. And actually, believe it or not, decimals are a lot easier to work with than fractions because you don't have to worry about eighths and twelfths and sixteenths and what's equivalent to what. You just have to know the base 10 system, which we've talked about, the powers of 10. Let's look at some models of decimals. First of all, this is a whole. Think about that whole pizza I was talking about. Of course, you've never eaten a square pizza. Well, I take that back. I think some pizza places have made square pizzas at one point in time. Piece. This is a whole number. We'll think of this as the number 1. If we want to break it up into tenths, we would cut it into 10 pieces because there are 10 tenths in one whole. A model of that. So this would be one whole. You can just watch this right here. And this one whole has been broken up into tenths. And if you count, there are 10 tenths. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. It's just like if you think about $1, there are 10 dimes in a dollar. So 10 cents, you can think about a tenth as being 10 cents. Okay? The next place we are going to talk about is the thousandths place. And let's look at that and see the model in comparison to the one whole. So here's one whole again. And we have now divided those tenths into 10 pieces as well, and we get our hundredths. So there are 100 pieces in one whole. So we can think of that as our pennies. Our pennies are actually, if you think about the dollar, our pennies are actually, there's 100 of them in a dollar. So 100, and we would think of that as the 1 cent, okay, the penny. And then our last place that we have to be familiar with in 5th grade is our thousandths place. So we have our one whole here again. And then we look at the thousandths. This doesn't have an equivalency in money, so you can't really think of $1 and something coming in thousands because pennies are as small as we break our money into. But there are 1,000 of these little tiny pieces. If you wanted to count every one of them, go for it, but I'm not going to. Just trust me. There are 10 here, 10 squares here, and then we know the 10 pieces when we looked at our tenths. So there are 1,000 pieces in one whole, and we call those thousandths. When we're talking about decimals, we put a TH at the end of the places. So the place names, we're going to talk about that right now. We have our tenths. This is very different from the tens place. Tens are actually 10 whole pieces, but we're now talking about tenths. These are fractions. So the tenths place, there's that THS, okay? And we said there were 10 of those in one whole. They're going to be up to 10. But once again, we're based on the powers of 10. Then our hundredths place, which is actually smaller pieces than the tenths. That's hard to remember because if you look at, if you're thinking about tens and hundreds, hundreds are bigger than tens, but we're talking about decimals now. So there's 10 pieces here. They're actually bigger than the hundredths. Look at their smaller pieces. So we said in our hundredths there are 100 pieces, and we're going to put 10 pieces. in one whole, 100 pieces in one whole. And the last place we have to deal with are the thousands place. If you're thinking whole numbers, thousands are way bigger than hundreds and tenths, but we're not. We got to turn our thinking around. We had tenths are bigger than hundreds, which are bigger than the tiny little thousands. So it's just reverse thinking when you're talking about decimals. So there's actually 1,000 pieces in one whole. So let's look back at this again. We had one whole. This is a whole number, but once we start breaking it into pieces, it's no longer a whole number. We have our tenths, which is like the 10 cents, right? We have our hundredths, which is like our pennies, and then we can't think of the thousandths with money, but they are tiny little pieces. Think about if you took that whole pizza that you ordered from Pizza Hut and cut it up into 10 pieces. They'd get pretty decent pieces. But what if you cut it up into 100 pieces? Think how small those pieces would be. And then to take that even farther, if you cut that one pizza up into 1,000 pieces, those thousands would be tiny little pieces. It would be more like a small little bite than a slice of pizza, wouldn't it? We're now going to model some decimals using a place value chart rather than just looking at the pieces that I showed you earlier. But before we do that, very important to remember what I told you in a previous video about the word and. The word and is only used when you're talking about decimals. You don't say it when you are reading regular whole numbers. If I have the number 122, a lot of us get into that habit of saying 122, but that's really not correct. If you're saying 122, it actually would look like this, 122. So get into the practice of only saying and when you're talking about decimals. Let's look at a few written models using the place value chart. If I had the number 1 and 3/10, this is how I'd write it, 1 and 3/10, and then I can model it. It would be one whole piece. I would get my 10th pieces, and I would have to color in how many of those? Well, I look at the number right here and it's a 3, so that means I'd have to color in 3 of those. There's 1 piece, 2 piece, and 3 piece. So that represents 1, well, that's a whole piece, and 3/10. Alright, let's try to model another number. If I had 2 and 35 hundredths. Now when I say this, I say 35 hundredths. So I read the whole number after the decimal, and then after I've read the whole number, then wherever it landed in the place value would be the actual name that I say. So earlier I only had 3/10, now I have 35 hundredths. So I'm going to model that. Now I have 2 whole pieces. I will still get my tenths block out, and I'll go ahead and get my hundredths block out now. And so I would color in 3 of these guys, and 5 of these little guys. And this is kind of hard to color on the Mimeo, so I apologize, guys, for my coloring. So there is 2 and 35 hundredths. Let's do another model with thousandths now. Maybe I have 1 and 451 thousandths. Did you see how I read that? 451 thousandths. Let's model that with our pieces. 1 whole piece. I need some tenths. I need some hundredths, and I need some thousandths, which is going to be a little hard to color in for me for sure. So there's 1, 2, 3, 4. You're going to have a lot of practice with this during the workstations, so don't worry about if you're concerned about how I am doing this right now, just know that you will have a lot of practice. And then if I could really see that little dot, I'd have one little tiny dot there, okay? And you can see what I said about how thousands are smaller than hundreds and they're smaller than tenths, where that's not how it works over here in our whole numbers.